recording, we will understand what adaptive thinking is for the Claude models, and then we will run a Python program which implements adaptive thinking that will help us further to understand how adaptive thinking works in Claude model. So adaptive thinking lets Claude dynamically determine why, when and how much to use extended thinking with this thinking mode, right? So adaptive thinking is the recommended way to use extended thinking. So extended thinking, Anthropic is going to deprecate uh, with Sonnet 4.6 and Opus 4.6, and adaptive thinking is the only way to turn on thinking with Claude Opus 4.8, 4.7, right? And as I said, like with Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6, it is still supported but will be deprecated in future, right? Claude Fable 5 and Claude Mythos 5, which we do not have access right now. The access was given for a very short amount of time and then taken away. Thinking is always enabled, right? And you cannot disable it, right? In the other models, I can, if I want, I can disable the thinking, but in Mythos 5 and Fable 5, we cannot. And adaptive thinking is again the only thinking mode in those models. On Claude Mythos preview, adaptive thinking is the default mode and auto applies whenever thinking is unset. Instead of manually setting a thinking token budget, adaptive thinking lets Claude dynamically determine when and how much to use the extended thinking based on the complexity of each request, right? And as I mentioned, on Claude Opus 4.8 and Claude Opus 4.7, adaptive thinking is the only supported thinking mode. Manual thinking, where we used to do type enabled and used to give a budget token, that is no longer accepted, right? And so this supported models, we spoke about this, the same thing that we spoke earlier. These are reiterated here. And the thing that I was telling, that for 4.6, Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6, the manual way of enabling thinking mode will be deprecated in future, and the recommendation is to use adaptive thinking, right? Now, how adaptive thinking works? In adaptive mode, thinking is optional for the model. Claude evaluates the complexity of each request and determines whether and how much to use extended thinking. And there is a parameter now called effort, right? You can also influence the thinking, the extent of thinking through this effort parameter. The default effort level is high, where Claude almost always thinks, and at a lower effort level, Claude may skip thinking for simpler problems, right? And this is the documentation for the effort level and how the thinking behavior works in all this effort model. So if you see, there is an output config where you can set what your effort is, right? So if it is max, Claude always thinks with no constraints on thinking depth, right? If it is extra high, Claude always thinks deeply with extended exploration, and it is available in Claude Fable 5, Mythos 5, Claude Opus 4.8 and 4.7. So 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6, Opus 4.6, we cannot do extra high. High is the default. Claude almost always thinks, provides deep reasoning on complex tasks. Medium, Claude uses moderate thinking, may skip thinking for very simple queries. And low is Claude minimizes thinking, skips thinking for simple tasks where speed matters most, right? Let's see an example how we can do this. So the first lab program that I have, it's a very trivial prompt. Say hello in one short sentence. I have enabled the type adaptive thinking type, and you will see when I run this, the thinking tokens will be, thinking tokens will be 0, right? So the thinking tokens, output tokens, where are the thinking tokens? Yeah, the thinking tokens are 0, right? Now I want to check one thing. So thinking tokens equal to 0 here. If I put the output config, I have not tested it, right? So let's see what happens if I say output config. If I put as max, do I actually force it to think even for smaller ones? Let me check that, right? So if I stop present, okay, looks like even if I do max, right, thinking tokens is equal to 0 because it is small. Claude always thinks with no constraint, so if it is, it has, okay, so the effort, whenever I give the effort, right, it doesn't mean that I am forcing it to think. It will, Claude will decide whether to think or not. The effort part determines how much it will think when it needs to think, right? That is the that is this particular configuration, right? Okay, now let's look at this, right? So here I have two prompts. One is a very trivial prompt. What is 2 plus 2? 4. It should not think. And the other one requires some thinking, right? 3 friends split a restaurant bill. Anna pays 20% more than Ben. Ben pays $6 less than Cleo, right? For this, it should do some thinking. I have enabled thinking through the thinking parameter, right? And display summarized, right? When I say display summarized, it will display the thinking as well, right? It will summarize the thinking and it will show it to me. If I don't do this, it will omit that display, right? And this is where I am now displaying the content and the thinking, right? So I am taking each block from the resp.content, and that's what I'm printing, right? So I'm first thinking, showing, right, for that particular prompt, was there any thinking happen, right? Has thinking will be true. How many thinking tokens? What are the output tokens? In if has thinking, what was the thinking that happened, right? That I'm doing it using the b dot thinking. So these are the summarized thinking, right? So the block from the resp.content, the block dot thinking, the b dot thinking will have the summarized thinking. So let me run this and let's see, it's lab 01, right? So if we see the first one, 2 plus 2 equal to 4, very trivial, no thinking, Claude answered directly, right? And for the next one, if you see, so hard, right? Thought it, yes, it used 137 thinking tokens. This was a summarized thinking, right? I'm setting up variables for Ben, Anna, then how it is getting the answer, setting up the problem. Let me define, these are all the summarized thinking that it did, right? And finally, it gave me the answer, right? So this is how the thinking, adaptive thinking works in Claude Code. This is a very innovative way of enabling thinking within the Claude models, right? And this particular link has detailed instructions, detailed documentations on adaptive thinking. That's all I wanted to show you as part of the adaptive thinking today. Thank you.